Welcome back to The Road Chose Me. On today's episode, a question that I get asked all the time: what's better, a gas engine or a diesel engine for long-term international overlanding? And a lot of people are shocked to find out that the little Jeep I drove to Argentina and this Jeep that I drove all the way around Africa, they are both gas engines. That's right, they're fuel injected, they're computer controlled. How did that work out for me? What do I recommend? What's best in the year 2020 if you're looking to drive around the world? Stick around, that's all coming up on this episode of The Road Chose Me. So I feel like the world is a lot different than most people are assuming. It's overall a lot more developed. There are a lot more gas stations. There's a lot more electricity and Wi-Fi than I think a lot of people assume. And I know right off, everyone worries about availability, and there's kind of this myth or this understanding that diesel is king, and to drive around Africa or somewhere else remote in the world, you would have to have a diesel vehicle. And maybe that was true in the 80s. I don't know, I wasn't driving around the world, but these days, it's simply not true. Check out this video on the screen. This is me driving through the capital city of Benin. And pretty much every capital in Africa look like this, and small villages also. So what do you see on the roads? You see a lot of really cheap Chinese scooters and motorbikes. And what do they all run on? They all run on gas, not diesel. So what that means is that gas oftentimes is more available than diesel. Because these little scooters have such small tanks, gas is available all the way really frequently. And more so, people take these little scooters out to remote villages, so the further you get off the beaten path, the more likely it is that you're going to find gas for sale. On the other hand, huge transport trucks, they only stay on the main roads, and they have such enormous tanks, they don't need to fill up very often. So actually stations that have diesel can be further apart than stations that have gas. So it turns out that gas is available absolutely everywhere. No doubt, sometimes there are shortages. I did run into trouble when I was in the Republic of Congo. They'd turned off their refinery, but I mean, they were having huge gas and diesel shortages. So it's not like one was going to be better than the other. Same story in Sudan. And then actually when I was in Angola, the German couple I was traveling with, they had a diesel vehicle. And it turned out Angola had a huge diesel shortage because the government was buying it all to run generators. We went to about 20 stations in a row that all had gasoline. Not a single one of them had a drop of diesel. Although sometimes people assume diesel is more available, it can sometimes flip in the other direction. Not only availability is something you have to worry about, but also the quality of what you're getting. There's no doubt that diesel engines have a lot of advantages. They run cooler, they make more torque, they probably are more fuel efficient, which means you'll spend less money. And even better than that, in nearly every country, diesel is cheaper than gas, sometimes half price. So again, you'll be saving money if your vehicle burns diesel. While all those advantages are true, there are a lot of disadvantages as well that are specific to driving around the world and getting to really remote locations. Modern gas engines, they're much better at dealing with low quality gas than modern diesel engines are at dealing with low quality diesel. So I know in our developed countries, diesel standards now are that sulfur has to be less than about 5 parts per million. I read a report, a lot of the countries I was driving through in West Africa, they have 2,000 parts per million of sulfur in their diesel. What that means is, if you have a newer diesel engine, it is absolutely not going to function on that quality of diesel. And I met multiple people who were having nightmares in Argentina. An Australian couple, they shipped their brand new Land Cruiser from Australia to South Africa. And South Africa has good diesel, so they didn't have a problem there. The very first day they drove out of South Africa and filled up, the computer shut down the engine and physically would not move. They spent thousands of dollars getting it transported back to South Africa. Then they had to get the computer remapped and they had to have all the emissions controls removed off the engine. And this is the big fancy 4.5 litre turbo diesel V8 Toyota engine. So what that means is, if you have a diesel engine newer than about 2007, you have a lot of emissions controls and a lot of computer controls on that engine that really don't make it ideal for getting remote in the world. And I think the general advice nowadays is, if you're driving an old diesel, yes, it makes sense, and that's a very good choice. Old diesels are mechanically injected, they don't have any computer, they're very simple. In fact, they're pretty much a tractor. The engines are really durable and strong. You can run them on vegetable oil or, really bad quality fuel, and they're gonna keep running. That's why people love them so much. Diesels from the 80s and the 90s. But the problem when you get newer than that is they have so much emission stuff on them, and especially these common rail high pressure diesel engines, they absolutely cannot tolerate bad quality diesel. As much as I'm excited that Jeep now have a diesel Wrangler, I think it's a fantastic choice if you're staying in North America or if you were staying in Australia or South Africa. Absolutely, the quality of the diesel there means you can have one of these new engines. But if you're looking to drive across Central Asia, if you're looking to drive around Africa, those new engines, they're just not going to tolerate that diesel. And strangely enough, because of this, in many parts of the world where people can buy diesel Land Cruisers or even diesel Jeeps, people actually choose to buy the gas version of those vehicles. South Africans buy gas Jeeps. Europeans now are buying gas Land Cruisers instead of the diesel Land Cruisers because they want to drive them down into Africa, they want to drive them across Central Asia, and the gas engines are actually much more tolerant of bad gas, and so it's a much better choice for driving around the world. For the Pan American Highway, things are changing rapidly. Many countries do have low sulfur diesel. I'm reading reports of people who are getting away with it with new engines. At the same time, I'm reading reports of people who are having nightmare scenarios where their engines in their Sprinter vans are literally blowing up because of the low quality diesel. For me personally, I still wouldn't risk taking one of these new diesel engines down into Central or South America. I just don't think it's worth the risk. And before I went to Africa, I certainly became convinced that I really needed an old diesel engine. I actually spent an enormous amount of money trying to put a diesel engine into a Jeep that I had, and I thought that would be a good solution for Africa. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and what I learned is I spent way more money on that conversion than I spent in gas to drive all the way around Africa. So from a financial perspective, doing an engine conversion just so that you can have diesel, it makes no sense whatsoever. On top of that, an engine conversion is never going to be as reliable. It's never going to work the same as factory installation did. So my advice, please learn from my mistake. I wasted a lot of money and tears trying to do a diesel conversion. Don't do a diesel conversion. If you want to go and have adventures, take the gas vehicle you've already got and go and spend that money on adventures. You're going to have a really good time and you're not going to have a problem finding gas wherever you go in the world. While gas engines are more tolerant of bad gas, my advice is don't buy a vehicle that requires premium gas. Certainly in West Africa, you're not going to find premium. In rural areas of Bolivia, you're not going to find premium. The lower grade of gasoline your engine requires, the better. Which is also another really good reason that you shouldn't be supercharging your vehicle, because you're just increasing the octane requirements, and that's a bad thing. You're also adding heat, which is something that you really don't want to do. A piece of advice too, when you are buying gas or diesel, try and go to the station that is the busiest in whatever town you happen to be in. That means that the fuel in the tanks is being rotated more often, so it hasn't been sitting in there for a long time and it hasn't had a chance to absorb water. And hopefully it also means those tanks are used quite often, so they're not going to be rusty, and the fuel that comes out of them hopefully will be cleaner. And it's a really good way to know if locals are going to that particular station, then it must have reasonable quality. Because if lots of them have bought bad gas from a different station, they're not going to be going to that station anymore. And they'll know too. I had a few people in Africa who would say, don't go to that station or don't buy fuel in that town because it's really bad for your engine. Keep your eyes and ears open, buy wherever locals are buying, they know what's up. If you're worried about getting your vehicle repaired and you assume that diesel engines are more common, well, that's true to a point. If you have an old diesel, yeah, chances are guys on the side of the road will know how to fix it, but actually they know how to fix engines like mine as well. It's a relatively old school V6 fuel injected with spark plugs. They know what that's about. What they don't know anything about is brand new diesel engines that have things like diesel particulate filters, that have high pressure injection pumps, that have really strange high pressure fuel rails. Those things are not common in rural parts of the world because they can't handle the diesel. So if you drive one of those, they're not going to have any ability to diagnose that computer, and that's going to be really hard to repair and work on as you drive around rural parts of the world. But certainly gas engines, they're relatively simple, and it's not going to be a big deal to find someone who can work on it. If you do have a computer controlled engine, whether it's gas or diesel, you definitely should carry some way that you can read and reset the trouble codes in the engine. My Jeep, I can actually read the trouble codes right on the dash, and on my laptop, I have a huge document of what all the trouble codes mean. I also have a programmer from AEV, so I can reset those trouble codes. If you do start having engine trouble, being able to read those trouble codes is going to be a really big help in trying to figure out what the problem actually is. So there you have it. I'm assuming that's not what most of you were assuming. Let me know in the comments below if you thought a diesel engine was mandatory to get remote in Africa or in other parts of the world. And if you enjoyed this video, please do hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes. There's plenty more practical, real world advice like this coming up so that you can have the information you need to get out there and have your own grand overland adventure.